Okay, so this is our fifth and final segment of the training on race, culture, and ethics in social work. And so we've talked about culture in general, the definitions of culture, what formulates a culture. We've talked about race, and of course, what defining features and characteristics formulate a race. And we've talked about the different racial issues that a lot of our adoptive families will come in contact with and a lot of our adoptive kids will come in contact with. We have talked about cultural encounters and how important they are to have for both us and for our children. And we've talked about discussing issues of race and culture and how to appropriately and ethically discuss issues of race and culture. And so in this final segment, I'm going to do two things really. The first thing I'm going to do is we're going to talk about the 4 stages of cultural competence, and then we are going to do a little formulated question and answer time. So we'll get to that in a minute. But first I wanted to discuss with you the 4 different stages of cultural competence. So the first stage is unconscious incompetence. And so what this is another word for this would be you're blissfully ignorant. You don't know that you don't know. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people like this. They are ignorant about certain racial and cultural issues, but they don't know that they're ignorant. They don't know that they don't know. I know when we first brought Silas home, there was a lady I knew that kept using the term Oriental to describe him. And she didn't know that Oriental to describe a person is offensive in the Asian culture. And so it was a good learning opportunity for me to say, hey, Oriental's a rug or a vase. When you're talking about a person, you use the term Asian. But she wasn't being rude. She wasn't being offensive. It's just that she didn't know. And so it was a good opportunity to open some communication there and to educate and to inform. My little brother is currently in the process of adopting from South Korea, and he said he's definitely taking every learning opportunity he can to educate his wife's family, because my family is actually quite Asian now. Of the soon-to-be 5 grandchildren in my family, 4 of them are Asian. So our family has become much more educated, but they're taking every opportunity to now educate her side of the family on issues of race and culture. So I know there was a guy I dated in college, and he was from Arkansas, and so he fell in this category of just blissfully ignorant. God bless his soul. He didn't know that he was just being ignorant, but blissfully ignorant. Then we have the second one, so that was unconscious incompetence, and just that you don't know that you don't know. Then you have conscious incompetence is the second phase, the second stage, and this is you're aware that you are lacking knowledge about race or culture, and so you still don't know. You still aren't familiar, aren't aware, aren't knowledgeable about the facts and the issues, but at least at this point you know that you don't know. And I know this was a lot of us probably when we first entered this field. When I first entered the field of social work and the field of adoption, there was a lot that I did not know. But at that point I knew that I didn't know it. And so then that leads to this third step, which is conscious competence. And this is the intentional act of you learning about somebody's culture or about somebody's race. And so these two kind of go hand in hand, and hopefully are happening simultaneously and kind of back and forth. You're learning that you don't know. You hear something, you say, oh, okay, I didn't know that. And then hopefully you immediately go into conscious competence, where you learn about it and you ask questions. And, if you don't know something, you say, okay, why is that? Or what is that happened? So a lot of times these two can really go hand in hand and be happening simultaneously. I know a lot of our families are in this position, when they go through our training or when they go through the adoption experience in general, there's a lot that they don't know. And so they realize they don't know it, but then they learn about it, and they learn then those distinguishing factors of that culture or that race, and they take the opportunity to learn. Then you have the fourth step, which is unconscious competence. And this is when being culturally competent has just become a way of life for you. You are so immersed within different cultures, within knowledge of different cultures and races, that you are a competent person about other cultures, but that it happens unconsciously at this point. I don't think any of us will ever fully be 100% culturally competent 100% of the time and know everything there is to know about other races and cultures. It's just not possible. But that doesn't mean that we can't constantly and continually be in the process of learning more about other cultures and other races. So those are the 4 steps to becoming culturally competent individuals and social workers. Now, I said I was going to do a question and answer time, and you're probably thinking to yourself, how is she going to do a question and answer time when we can't interact with her? So what I did was I looked up on the internet just some questions that families and people have about being racially and culturally ethical and competent. And so I thought I would share some of those questions and then answer some of those questions as well. So one of the first questions was, how does ethnocentrism affect our kiddos? And if you're not familiar with the term ethnocentrism, what ethnocentrism is it is the belief that our values as Americans or whatever culture you're in, you think that it is the standard by which other cultures should be judged. And so the American way of doing something is the right way of doing something. And so then we judge other cultures based on our cultural norms, our cultural standards. And so how does this affect the children that come into our homes and come into our lives? That is a good question. Let me answer that for you. Ethnocentrism affects our children because when they're coming into our homes and they are seeing things done a certain way, or maybe they have a certain way of doing things that they've always done them. Maybe it's an ethnicity culture thing. Maybe it is an orphanage culture thing, where it's just the way that they have always done things, and it's the way things were for them in their life thus far. When we take our standard and say this is how we judge things according to how we do it, in our heads, nothing is going to measure up. And so the things our kids do, the things these children do, will be wrong in our eyes because we are viewing it as less than the American way of doing things. And so we have to be careful to be understanding that just because we do things a certain way doesn't mean it's the right way of doing things. I hope that answers your question. Next question, please. Yes, I have a question. How does an adopted family need to change their culture of their family and how things are done in their house when an adopted child comes into the home? Well, that is a great question. Thank you for asking. I can answer that for you. I think a lot of times the easiest way that I explain this to the families that I work with is imagine that the shift that needs to take place is 100 percentile. So you have 0% to 100%. And so you have this culture, and your child is on one side, and you're at the other side. If you're expecting your child to come 100% to meet you at where your culture is and what you guys are like in your home, it's a long way for that child to travel. But if you can meet them in the middle, maybe 30-70, maybe 40-60, whatever that might be, it's less of a distance for your child to have to travel, who is already facing new environments, new language, new people, new family, new foods. They're making a lot of shifts and adjustments. So what things can you change in your culture to make it an easier adjustment on your child? Can you change some of the foods that you guys eat? Make it more like the foods your child is used to in their home culture. Can you watch movies that your child likes and that your child was used to already seeing? Can you go out and buy new clothing, or buy new toys, or buy new objects that might be more apropos to what they were used to? How can you make your child's adjustment easier on them? How can you change the culture of your home so that it's more similar to what your child is used to in the culture that they come from? And kind of help them make that adjustment and meet them halfway, rather than just expecting them to change completely to what your family's culture is. I hope that answers your question. Thank you. We have time for one more question. Anybody? Yes, I have a question. How does cultural relativism affect adoption? So cultural relativism believes that there is no universal standard for morality, for ethics. That each culture is different in regards to what right and wrong are, and we can't judge them because that's right in that culture, or that's wrong in that culture, and we can't judge them. The difficulty with this is that then our kiddos who have been taught right from wrong in their culture are coming into our culture where right and wrong might be completely different for these children. And so this kind of goes back to the ethnocentrism topic of how do you judge what's right and wrong? Of course, there are absolutes. The law is absolute. The Bible is absolute. And so we can use those things as our judges of what is right and what is wrong. And we can teach our kiddos about that. We can teach our kiddos about the Ten Commandments. We can teach them about American law and what is right and what is wrong. But then there are so many different little gray areas. There are different little inconsistencies between cultures that really don't matter in the grand scheme of things. You might think that your way of doing things is best, and your child might think that the way of they're doing things is best. Maybe you think your kid needs to make their bed first thing in the morning, and they think, I like to make my bed right before bedtime so I can crawl in freshly tucked in sheets. This was an issue in my house, so it's not out of left field. And it's not something that matters, but it can become something that matters when we think our way of doing things is the right way of doing things, and our kids need to abide by our way of doing things. So just making sure that we're understanding that our kiddos are coming from a different culture in which things were done differently. Our job is not to westernize our children and to form them into American culture. Our job is actually to embrace the culture they're coming from, and to making sure that they find a way to meld the two cultures and to be Asian American or African American or Latino American, whatever they might be. Helping them find a meshing and a melding of the two cultures that fits them. And maybe that changes the culture of your entire family. Maybe that changes the culture of your entire home. But that's okay. It's going to be a new culture. Like we said earlier, culture is always changing and is always shifting, and there's nothing wrong with that. So, to summarize kind of the information we've talked about today, it's important to recognize the differences between culture and race. They're not one and the same. Everyone has differing cultures, which assists them in determining what their values are, what their beliefs are, what their worldviews are. We also need to be mindful of the racial issues that are affecting our children and are affecting our families. Being colorblind does not help enhance our racial and cultural competence. It holds us back from being culturally competent. Be aware of the ground rules for discussing racial and cultural topics. And lastly, ensure that we're enhancing our cultural competence by regularly participating in cultural encounters with our children, with our families. So I hope this information has been beneficial for you today. I hope you've enjoyed it. And I really appreciate you listening. And I hope all of you have a great day. Thanks.